and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Louisa and this is a beautiful special place I've selected today to speak to you from, I guess supported by Mother Earth in this video, I'm hoping, as I talk about a subject which I feel most human beings are actually going through in different ways, on different levels, whether consciously or not. And most of my videos are, I guess, a fusion between mental health issues and spiritual issues. It's almost impossible to separate them in my mind, although, you know, there are plenty of people who are more practical than that and don't spend a lot of time thinking about the spiritual or the non-physical. But if you do feel that that is a part of why you're experiencing mental illness or mental health issues, and that could be any diagnosis, or it might be undiagnosed, you might never have gone to a doctor, but you know that you are not coping very well with the world the way it is at the moment, or difficulties are challenging you to such a degree that you're suffering enormously, psychologically, emotionally. So this might be the video for you, and I hope it brings some relief. That's always my intention, is just to, I guess, provide a little something that can help you on your way in the same way that I've been helped by insights of others. So this topic today is on grief, and it's, in my mind, there is a lot of grieving on the planet because we are collectively healing ourselves, and healing goes hand in hand with grieving. I often recall the words of my psychologist, somebody who is a very important person to me on my recovery journey. She would say that all therapy is really a grieving process. So, you know, reflecting on that, what does she mean? And I would suggest it's because at the heart of every emotional or psychological conflict or distress or illness is some kind of loss, some sense of what's not there or not right, or something that you had and then is gone. So for a lot of people who view my videos, you might have childhood trauma, because that's where I guess that's where my healing journey started, was with the realization that, you know, I wasn't a very happy child, despite a, on the surface, happy family, that my emotional needs weren't being taken care of, and I didn't feel valued and important as the person I am. I was definitely valued and cared for, but the problem with humanity so often is that we project our ideals onto other people. So I suppose I feel like I grew up trying to be somebody I really wasn't, and not knowing how to really express myself in a safe way. So it's complicated, of course. Healing is very complicated and very individual and unique. But on the whole, there is probably a sense of not having your needs met in childhood in some way. So it could be an obvious loss where you lost a parent, or maybe you were clearly abused in some way, so psychological or sexual or physical abuse, which is loss of dignity, loss of power, loss of your human rights to the sanctity of your body. So there's a great deal of loss that comes from that, loss of trust as well, especially if it occurred, those abuses occurred with a close family member. But even if it didn't, there's still a loss, or a sense of betrayal and loss of trust, that this world isn't safe. You know, that there's that message, perhaps, that the world isn't safe and that you are not okay, that you may be bad, that perhaps you deserved it, or something along those lines. So if if your trauma or the things that you feel have shaped your current suffering happened in your childhood, then the logic around them is going to be really black and white. So if you dig down in your therapy or your self-reflection, you'll probably find that there's kind of some black and white thinking like, it's all my fault, I'm bad, I deserve that. If your experiences, your negative experiences that shaped you perhaps happened later on in life, you might have a bit more resiliency because the adult part of you would have come online by then, and you can rationalize that a bit better. You can use some logic to say, well, there's one bad person in the world, but not everybody's bad. Yeah, so you can kind of mitigate some of the distress that it causes. But even so, we're kind of splitting hairs, because if you feel that something in your life is worthy of grief, then it is worthy of grief. So that might be enough of a take-home message today for you, because a lot of times the things that have happened to us, we deny that we should even be grieving them. And we feel as if, grief only belongs to, losing somebody to death perhaps, or to a huge natural disaster, or your house burns down in a fire, like dramatic things that anyone would kind of come around you and pat you on the back and say, that's really awful, here's some time to grieve. They're kind of sanctioned griefs, or grieving that is allowed and acceptable in our society. Now, there's a whole lot of other stuff which doesn't fit into that basket but may have really wounded you. And it can be things like, moving house, or moving towns, or moving countries. Cultural bereavement is a very big source of grief for people who've been severed from their culture. It might be that culture was severed in the generations before you. Perhaps it wasn't you necessarily that had to move, but your parents or your grandparents, and they lost something, and you have therefore also lost your lineage, your sense of connection. A lot of people report, when they go back to their homeland countries or the countries where their ancestors came from, that sense of connection comes back and is felt and comforting. So that could be what's happened. It might be around work. You could lose status, or you could feel that you never achieved status. Plenty of people have dreams but feel like they were never quite able to achieve them. That is a type of loss as well. You don't have to have had something and then lost it to lose it, if that makes sense. You can have a dream, just a thought, just a wish for romance, or for love, or connection, or just to even be a more decent human being than you think you are. That you have some kind of, version of yourself that you imagine you would like to be, but right now you feel so far off the mark. That can cause you grief. You can grieve over regrets. You can grieve over things that in your heart you have done which have caused other people pain. No matter how much you can you justify that, there's still a sense of grief that needs to be gone through, a loss of perhaps your ideal version of yourself, who you thought you were. We can set ourselves up for all sorts of traps, I guess, in life by denying how we really feel about things. So I guess, look, I can't cover them all. There are a myriad, infinite possibilities of what you might feel you've lost. But one thing that is probably the common denominator to all loss is loss of connection to source, or to God, or to divine, the all. universal intelligence, if you prefer to think of it like that. The evidence all around you that you are actually part of this reality, that you are existing here in what you can see around you, and that in itself is a sense of loss, because in this physical dimension we are focused on our senses, on thinking of things as out there, as being separate to us. Your partner is not you, you are not your partner, that table is not you, you're not the table. We feel the separation, and that's how it's meant to be, so that we can magnify our experience in this one little bandwidth of reality that we have chosen, called Louisa's life, or Bob's life, or whoever's life, right? So we deliberately separate when we come here to the physical dimension, and that separation in itself is a grief, because not being connected to our spiritual source, the non-physical source, is very painful for a lot of us. Some people might not relate to that because they are very enmeshed in the physical world and perhaps fairly happy with what life has dished up to them, or their experiences of the physical world. So that's not really the people that I'm talking to, I guess. I'm assuming that for many people going through a mental illness crisis, that underneath it somewhere is a sense of needing more, and a hole inside that perhaps hasn't been filled, able to be filled. So that can be the ultimate source of grief, is separation from source. I am digressing a little though, because that's going quite big picture, and what I really want to focus on today is more the importance of, first of all, just grieving whatever is real for you. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you don't feel that connection to source is a point of grief for you, then discard that and just think about what it is that you are grieving. Is it the you that never materialized? Is it the childhood that should have been better? Is it the mother or father that never told you how great you were, special you are? Is it the body that you've neglected and abused over time through alcohol or eating or whatever your habits have been? Is it things you've actually lost through illness? Was it some tragedy that took something away from you? So whatever it is, that very painful thing is actually, bizarrely, the key to your liberation and your healing. Because when we exhaust our capacity to run away from that grief, and we're very, very good at it, so we'll invent all sorts of ways, and we don't do this consciously, it's kind of like it's almost like the soul's way of just waiting until we're ready. And sometimes we push ourselves with our backs against the wall, or maybe to rock bottom, before we're actually willing to surrender and say, that thing that I've been running from my whole life perhaps is actually the thing I'm going to turn around and I'm going to look at. And if you do that, you could imagine that what you're actually meeting is this being that I'm calling the angel of grief. And the angel of grief doesn't look like a beautiful white shining angel, not when you're in the midst of the grief. She appears as chaos, as blackness, as fear, as anger, as shame, as a turmoil of negative emotions. Every emotion that you would rather die than feel is what the angel of grief holds out for you and says, here, this is what you have to feel. Because grief is not actually one thing. It's not an emotion per se. It's more like a palette of paint that's all mixed up. It's a palette of, it's got some anger in it, it's got shame in it, it's got self-loathing, it's got regrets, it's got all sorts of stuff in there, right? Actually, I wish I could remember which video it is, but Matt Kahn, who I'll put the link below, beautiful spiritual teacher, once talked about it in one of his teachings as grief being the great detoxifier. Because when you finally allow grief to do its work, the angel of grief to come into your life and communicate with you and start to help you, what you'll find is those negative emotions that have been stored because of that grief will start to come up. They'll be detoxified, pulled up, often in a painful way because we don't want to feel them. But if we allow it, that's what's going to happen. The stages of grief are one model that you can look at by Kubler-Ross, and she talks about denial and shock and anger, and there's a couple more. I might write them on the video. Have a look when I get back. My own personal experience of grief is it is that it's very messy. It's very feeling all sorts of things and in and out, and but it's also like the cork in a bottle. If your emotions or your being is like a bottle, right, the grief can act like a cork which kind of sticks. It stops anything from getting through. It stops the joy and the bliss and the happiness from getting through. So removing the grief or working with it unstoppers that bottle and allows the good stuff to come through. So you'll know that you're grieving. One sign is you'll know you're grieving when you start to go in and out of light and dark. So depression is not necessarily grief, because depression and continuous chronic sadness is more a resistance to grief, because grief is a lot more complex. Depression, I don't know, look, we can all argue about what it means to each and every person, but for me, depression's almost like a denial of feeling rather than a feeling itself. It's a kind of shut down, a hopelessness and despair which settles on everything and prevents feeling from coming out. When you start to cry, if you're depressed, it's a really good sign because it means that you're shifting the energy. So, notice that, right? If you're feeling really depressed and you start to cry, give yourself a pat on the back. Yep, you're moving from depression or apathy to grief. So that's a good thing. Now, if you allow that grief to move through you, and when I say allow, I mean grief requires inordinate amounts of surrender. It is the one emotion that if you allow it to do its work properly, you're going to, be just, okay, do with me what you will. So you don't know what's going to come up when you're grieving. You might need to express a lot of anger, for example. We tend to think of grief as just tears, but that may not be what it is. Also, there are many shades and spectrums to all the emotions. So tears, for example, you can do the howling, sobbing, wailing grief, and I can really recommend that. I mean, ask yourself, when did I cry like that? And for some of us, it might be when we were toddlers. It was the last time we actually howled. Howl is a really good howl, is a very therapeutic. So there's that kind of tears. Then there's the whimper tears. All these things are so beautiful in their own way, but the quiet grief where you're just curled up in a little ball and all that can come out of you are these whimpering noises. And sometimes not even tears will come, just the whimpers. The body actually knows how to do this and that's what I mean by surrender, because when we surrender, the emotions will just come out the way they come out. And you need to practice letting yourself make noises, make sounds that perhaps you feel embarrassed by. Initially that can happen because we get told, when we're little, we get trained, we're very programmed about this. Oh, that's inappropriate, and it's embarrassing, and the reactions of the adults around us teach us to shut these noises down. And when you see someone in that kind of unbridled pain, it's quite painful to watch because it brings up feelings of shame. So I recommend doing this in private, basically. But even that can be hard because we can censor ourselves. So try to let it go. Just try to let it go. Let whatever comes up, comes up. If you're angry, a really good one is to, I think I've probably mentioned this in videos before because it's just one of my favorites, but if you're angry at someone, if your grief is directed at an event that was caused by somebody, get a photograph, make a drawing of that person and yell at it, or tear it up into shreds, or get a teddy bear and call it whoever was your persecutor and whack it with a bat, or so get creative, because the body wants to actually release these emotions, and you'll know that you're doing it well or right, I suppose, because it will pass. So you will exhaust yourself, the emotions will kind of peter out, and you'll probably feel very tired, and that's a really good thing. And when you get to that feeling of just feeling tired and spent, that's when you nurture yourself. That's when you go and you cook yourself a bowl of whole organic brown rice and bok choy or something. Be kind to yourself, nurturing, right? Or have a bath, or or go for a walk, or whatever it is you do that makes you feel comforted. And if you can, take as long as you need. Take a day off, take a week off, take a year off. I don't know. Grief has its own time. Your job is to tune into what grief wants of you. What does grief want of me? There are, standard timelines for grief, and I was going through grief due to estrangement from family, which, by the way, is another unsanctioned type of grief, because my family hadn't died, but I was grieving their loss nonetheless, and that can happen. If a relationship breaks up or breaks down, we can grieve. So the therapist I was working on kept telling me that it was about 18 months I could expect of this deep, dark grief. And sure enough, it was actually pretty bang on 18 months. I had to take a whole year off my university studies. I really limited what I did that year and or that 18 months. And I wasn't kind of like waiting for the 18 months and then that's it and I'm rushing to that mark, because that is a mistake as well. We have to allow grief to take as long as it needs. But if you continually ride the waves of the grief, allow the emotions to come up, express them, and until you're spent, then rest, then it'll happen again, and it'll happen again, and it'll happen again, and it'll keep happening, and you feel like it's never going to end, but you have to trust. 18 months, sure enough, the grief started to dissipate, to the point where now, you know that you've passed through the grief, because grief transforms into something that's actually quite beautiful, quite exquisite, in the way that, I don't know, nostalgic memories can be, I guess, or because there's not the immediacy. The emotional charge has been removed now from what happened. And not only that, but if the process of grief is accompanied by your analysis and your thinking and your compassion, and you bring all of these other qualities you need to the fore, you'll find that you'll come to a place of gratitude. There's another beautiful writer, again, I'll put the link below. I can't remember the name of the book now, but I think it's called Healing from the Dark Emotions. She speaks about the journey of grief being from grief to gratitude, and that is the arc that we take. Because if you go through it properly, when I mean properly, there's no right or wrong actually, so that's probably a terrible word to use. When you go through it fully, right, when you fully experience grief, you'll come out the other end with this, it seems odd, but you'll come out with a sense of gratitude for the experience. I mean, I honestly can say that I would not take it back. My grieving that I went through, that 18 months of very, very difficult time. I think it was easier to go through that grief than it was to experience repressing it. And repressing it, you know, looked like at times addictions, it looked like depression, it looked like psychosis, it looked like all sorts of ways to do anything other than grieve. And I'm not blaming myself for that, because you will do this when you're ready. But hopefully this video is an invitation, because, you know, you might just be on that cusp. You might have tried so many things to run away from this grief, and now it's the time to feel what you have to feel. When you feel it, you will heal it. That is the cliche. And my new cliche is that, you know, grieving is healing. Grieving is healing. And grieving is one of those gifts that you can give the world, because there is a lot of loss and trauma and bereavement on the planet at the moment. I think I probably say that in every single video I do. And that it's not to be, you know, doomy gloomy about things. It's that the unconscious shadow is coming up for us all collectively as we agree and allow ourselves to ascend into higher states of consciousness. Because we can't go to those higher states of consciousness with these old stories. We can't go there with the grief in our heart. Grief, as you may well know, if you're in the middle of it right now, is a very heavy emotion. It weighs you down. So, you know, trust that through your feeling, it'll just get lighter and lighter and lighter, and eventually, eventually you will reach those higher states of consciousness. This time on the planet, it's optimal for that. We're here to do that. We're being supported in that. There is beautiful light energy everywhere, from the ether, from our higher selves, from divine intelligence, and from within, from our own hearts. But in order to let it out from our own hearts, we have to first purge what is in there. But even that word, see, I don't really like that word, because purging, again, it's like getting rid of. No, we want to embrace it. Because when you fully feel your grief, what you're almost doing, in fact you are doing, is you're shining the light of your loving consciousness onto your own pain. And you're saying, I love you. I acknowledge what you've gone through. I acknowledge how hurt you are. And it makes no difference what anyone else says about that. Do not let other people minimize your grief, minimize your pain, tell you that theirs is worse, or you should be coping differently, or that's no big deal, that happens to other people, or look at this country that's war-torn, what are you complaining about? You know, this term, first world problems, as funny as it is, there's just a danger that we can minimize our hurts and our, you know, the things we're going through. So if you are vulnerable to that, if you find that you keep resisting your own acknowledgement of your grief or your loss because you want to compare, it's your tendency, try to just shut that out and allow yourself to get to how you feel. Just honestly, you know, how do I feel about this? Was it a big issue for me? If the answer is yes, then there's work to do. So, well, I hope that's helpful. I'll end it now. It's a 30-minute video, which I think is enough of me. But yeah, it's so nice to make another video and speak from the heart, you know, because I have gone through a lot of this. There are a lot of people going through it. We are not alone. We're all in this together. And yeah, I'm just so wishing for your healing, so wishing for all of our healing, because what happens to one person happens to us all. The beautiful frequency that I'm often in these days, and I won't say always, because I tend to be what's known as a transmuter of energy. So I go up and down, and I can be very much in the higher consciousness, and then I can sink down into the darker emotions, and I sort of see my job down there is like I'm scooping up these dark emotions and I'm transmuting them, emotional alchemy, into the light, transmuting the negative emotions, the lower frequencies, into the higher frequencies. That's kind of my job. So I'm not going to say that I'm abiding in bliss all the time, but most of the time. So yes, I hope that brings you hope, because I'm just an ordinary person. And if you look at the internet right now, if you're following this kind of thing, you'll see how many people are going through this. There are millions on the planet right now who are doing this work. So trust it, and blessings to you with lots and lots of love and light and wisdom and courage for you to get through your grief. All right, namaste.